Hi, in this video we are going to learn about the Salesforce decorators that we use in the Lightning web components. Decorators are attached to a method or property and are used to dynamically alter the functionality. ECMAScript provides us with different types of decorators, but we are going to be focusing on the three main decorators that we use in Lightning web components, which are the @API, @track, and @wire. There is a format to follow when declaring a property with a decorator. And the format to follow is as follows. We would use the decorator name followed by our property name and the value that we want to assign to our property. An example would look like this. We would have our decorator, in this case the @track, followed by the property name, which I'm going to call name, and assign that value to my property name. Similarly, our decorator @API would be followed by the property name subject and the value that I want to assign to subject. @wire works with Apex classes. And how we would apply this is we would first have to import our Apex class to our JavaScript file, pass in the method name that we have defined in our Apex class that returns a value, and we are going to store that return value to our property name. Decoration can also be used for methods. So the format to follow would be we would have a decorator name followed by our method name and any parameters that we would want to pass into this method. An example would look like this. We have our decorator @API, our method name, and the property name that we want to pass into this method. Going forward, there are some keywords that we need to understand. A reactive property is one of those keywords. And what a reactive property does is that if there are any changes to a component that contains a reactive property, the component will re-render itself. We can observe this change in this example. On the top portion, I have a non-reactive property, and in the bottom portion, I have a reactive property section. The non-reactive property section will have the output above and a lightning input, and the reactive property section will have an output and similarly a lightning input below. The idea here is that once I enter my input into the non-reactive property, the component should not re-render itself, and the output therefore will not show. So let's look into this. Once a sample input is entered, we do not see the component being re-rendered or any changes being made to the output. However, if we were to enter values into the reactive portion, the change is detected and therefore re-renders the entire component. And the change that we observed was that the output was showed here, as well as every time a value was being entered into the lightning input, the output re-rendered itself, thus updating the output in this portion. The other keyword that we need to be familiar with is private property. And private properties can only be used where it is being defined. A private property does not have any decorator. But if you want to use an internal property in the template, then you would have to make it reactive by adding the attract decorator. Private properties are not reactive. Public properties, on the other hand, are used when a parent component is updating the child component's property and we need to re-render that component. To make a property as public, we annotate it with the @API decorator. And public properties are reactive. So going forward, we are going to look at our first decorator, which is attract decorator. The attract decorator is used to track a private property's value. And when this value changes, we are able to re-render our component. Tracked properties are also called private reactive properties, meaning that, as I mentioned earlier, any change will reflect only in the component. There are some points to remember, and that tracked properties are private and can be used directly in a template. If the property value changes, the component will re-render itself. And attract properties are suitable in situations where we need to keep track of the property's value. So let's look at a demo on how we can apply the attract decorator in code. In this example, we are going to try data binding with the attract decorator. We are going to create a Lightning Web component to input a student's name and their favorite subject. So let's start by opening our default org in our Visual Studio Code. Once we have successfully opened our default org, we are going to create a Lightning Web component, and we are going to name this component student form. We can confirm that the student form component has been created in our directory. And now we are going to create two tags to display properties and two Lightning input tags along with their handlers. So let's open the student form HTML and create a div to show the output and another div section for the input. So my first div shows the output, and my second div will have a value assigned to the first Lightning input, which is student name, and an onChange handler called change student name. Similarly, the second Lightning input will have the value subject assigned to it and an onChange handler called change fav subject. Now we are going to edit our student form.js, and we are going to add the attract properties to the Lightning inputs that we had assigned the values to, and we are going to create those handlers. So let's open our JS file. And the first thing we need to do, right after Lightning element, we have to import our track decorator. Now we are going to declare our properties along with the handlers. So I have declared student name with the decorator at track and assigned an initial value which is John Doe. I have also declared fav subject and assigned the at track decorator to it along with an initial declaration value chemistry. In the below section of code, my first event, change student name, will pass in the event to this change handler method. And every time the lightning input has a value registered in it, that value will be passed to this method being called by the onChange handler, and this value will be tracked by its declared property name student name. Similarly, for the fav subject, when I enter an input into the lightning input where I have declared fav subject value, the onChange handler will be fired and that value will be assigned to the fav subject property. And since it is tracked, the component will re-render itself. If, however, it's your first time using Visual Studio Code, you might notice that when you declare or input a decorator, you might run into a small error. And that can be solved by inputting a line of code to our jsconfig.json file. So let's open our config file. And just below compiler options, I'm going to add one line of code. Experimental decorators assigned to true, and I'm going to follow it up with a comma. To confirm that the changes have been made, I'm going to go back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to overwrite my jsconfig file. So I'm going to copy the values again and paste it and save it. This would solve our problem, and now we can continue. The next step would be to update our studentform.js meta file. And we are going to set the isExposed value to true, followed by our targets. Our targets will allow us to display our Lightning Web Component on the desired targets, which are either the record page, the home page, or the app page. Once I have saved that, I am going to push my source to my default Scratch org. Once I have successfully pushed my files, I am going to then proceed to display the component that I have created on my service app. So open our service app. Click on the gear icon on the right hand side and edit page. As we scroll down, we should be able to see student form Lightning Web component. We are going to drag this component onto our service page. And we're going to save it and go back. And the final step would be to enter some test data to see the changes in our component and test the add track decorator. So I'm going to start off by changing the name. As you can see, every time I make a change, the component is being re-rendered. So I'm going to add a student named Nadeem Fazloon, and I'm going to add a subject, computer science. Now that we have successfully created our Lightning Web component and learned data binding with the add track decorator, in the following episodes of this tutorial, we are going to learn about the other decorators and we are going to explore how to use these decorators as well. So I will catch you guys in the next one.